Sweet friends, welcome to a very special episode of Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? The show where we reveal those taboo modalities that just might be the medicine that your soul needs to feel free. I'm your host, Emily Fletcher, Broadway performer, turned meditation teacher, and longtime lover of the Vedas. And I'm so delighted to share this episode with you so that we can solve the challenges that we're facing as a species and have a great time doing it. So here's why today is so special, because today your guest is going to be moi, yours truly. So I've actually been drinking up the knowledge from the Vedas for over 16 years, and I've combined this ancient Vedic philosophy plus neuroscience plus positive psychology plus life coaching all into a course called Moving into Mastery. So I thought it'd be cool to create a podcast where we get to share some of the most life-changing, some of the most exciting foundational concepts from the Vedas with you today on the show. So you're going to get to enjoy some clips from the actual course itself. And so together, we're going to be talking about why isn't everyone studying the Vedas? And I really ask myself this, why isn't everyone utilizing this ancient wisdom that has stood the test of time for over 6,000 years? Different civilizations have been built on this very knowledge. So please enjoy this episode. And if you'd like to learn more about mastery, simply click the link in the show notes.
So I just want to give you a little bit of a history lesson on like where the Vedas came from. The Vedas are not a religion, it's not a doctrine, it's not a dogma. It's an ancient body of knowledge. It's about 6,000 years old. It is the same body of knowledge that gives us yoga, acupuncture, feng shui, Ayurvedic medicine, like most of these ancient systems of healing where we're using nature to help us get to where we want to go. Many of these are born out of the Vedas. So one of the reasons why the Vedas are so special is that for India, for many thousands of years, it was protected, right? There was the Himalayas on the north, and there was 2 oceans on the bottom, so it was very well protected for many thousands of years, which is why this knowledge was passed down for so many generations in its purity without being influenced by other philosophies and other religions. I am not an expert on this, but the little that I do know about other ancient philosophies, like the Mayans and the Incans and Hawaiian shamanism and the indigenous cultures of Africa and New Zealand, the Native Americans, like when you get to the root of the root of the root, they're really very much saying all the same thing. So I don't think that the Vedas are necessarily special. I just think that they were preserved very well for longer than most of the other philosophies have been preserved. We're going to start with a bedtime story in the morning. But I'm very, very obsessed with this book for many reasons. One, my new mark of a master is the ability to communicate something with simplicity. And this book is called A Little Story About the Greatest Thing That Ever Happened. And it is a children's book. And it was written by my friend and one of my teachers, a man named Will Dalton. And he basically managed to take the entirety of the Vedas and put it into one children's book. And how he did this, I still do not know. But this morning, this foundational training that we're about to dive into is basically the Vedas according to Emily. It's the why nothingness became somethingness. Why are we here? Why did the unmanifest become manifest? And so I think these are big questions. These are big, complex, juicy, philosophical questions that we're going to dive into. But I think to start with this beautiful, simple story is a really great way to contextualize it and to also simplify it and to give us a simple but solid framework for which we can elaborate on throughout the day. So a little story about the greatest thing that ever happened. There was once a beautiful being who sat alone in the middle of the universe, so radiant, the purest white light glowed about her always. She was breathtaking. She was divine. All the twinkling stars revered her as their creator. She knew everything, remembered everything. She was complete intelligence. She had never been born and never died. Her imagination was so exceptional that anything she desired could be created in an instant. She has reindeer antlers. For millions upon millions of years, she quietly kept her own company. For billions upon billions of years, she sat and thought. For trillions upon trillions of years, she endured her solitude, until finally, she grew bored. She yearned to be with another, yet there was no other. She desired to give and to share, but there was nothing to which she could give and share. She wanted to nurture and caress, to hold and be held, appreciate and be appreciated. She wanted to play, to sing, to dance. She wanted to love. Many eons went by and she became fed up. She knew herself to be joyous and was not pleased with her less than happy state. Because she could do anything and create anything, she spent her days thinking up solutions to her dilemma. One day she thought, if I could see myself, then at least I would appreciate myself. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, a mirror appeared, a mirror as big as the universe. She was delighted in what she saw, and she appreciated herself very much. Despite this, after 1 week, she was bored again. I will need to think of something more elaborate, she thought. I don't want to just look at myself. I wish I could be with another being. And because her imagination was so powerful, in an instant, she divided herself into 2 equal parts. She looked at the other being, an exact replica of herself, and was so delighted with her creation that she wept with joy. She could see and touch and play with her other self. They could even sing and dance together. But despite her new friend, in only a month, she began to feel bored again. It was true that her new creation was better than any mirror. She could cuddle, kiss, and caress, yet her other self knew what she was thinking as she thought it, knew what she was to say before she said it, and even laughed at her jokes before she told them. This was not enough. Something more complex was in order, something brilliant. She needed to create a being that was she and not she at the same time. She had to create something complex, magnificent, and extraordinary. Ages and eons went by, then an idea began to bubble around her boundless mind. She thought, if I could separate myself into 1 billion pieces and lose my memory, then when I met myself, it would be like meeting myself for the first time. She pondered, I could make so many parts of me that I would never get bored. I could create the impression of a beginning and an end, a start and a finish. I could design my senses to seek outwardly, yet I shall reside inwardly. I shall create a place, a playground, a world so beautifully delightful that upon my arrival, I will almost mistake its wonders for being more satisfying than the delight of knowing myself. She giggled with pleasure at her own ingenuity. I shall then be walking around magnificent, powerful, yet forgetful. I will never find myself, so I will never be bored again. After napping on her idea for an eon or two, she awoke from her slumber and concluded that her thoughts from the previous epoch were extreme. If she created her new idea, she'd be eternally trapped in a world of forgetfulness. She would never find herself, and that would be even more lonely, even more unexciting. Plus, she knew in all truth the discovery of herself would be the greatest gift of all. I will make some refinements, some minor adjustments, she thought. I shall give myself some little clues so that if I'm listening carefully, I will lead myself right back to me. Satisfied with her solution, she adjusted the volume of the world to be more colorful and slightly louder than the allure of herself. Then, smiling softly and compassionately, the ultimate creation streamed forth from her intensely focused imagination. She spared nothing in her conception. Her idea hurtled through space, building up speed and magnificence, and in an instant, in a moment, in a sound, a clap, a bang, a very big bang, God separated herself. In that moment, endless universes were created: gases, stars, planets, suns, moons, oceans, plant life, animals, and human beings. She was pleased, but now was not able to know the depth of her pleasure because she had been successful. She had forgotten that she was God. The humans that embodied her arrived even better than expected. They had 5 of their 6 senses looking toward the world and only 1 sense, the 6th sense, toward her inner self. The humans were exactly as she had planned: perfect, magnificent, beautiful, and completely forgetful. Every part of her was encoded in the humans, including God's incredible imagination, which could instantly create anything it thought into physical form. So successful was God in forgetting that it took ages and eons for humans to create things that they wanted. So effective was her plan of not recognizing herself, some parts of her waged war against other parts. It seemed that these fragments of God, humans mostly, were so infatuated with the world that they would fight each other to own it. This made God sad, which of course made every warring person sad. Perhaps I made the allure of the world too strong and my attraction too weak, God thought, because only a handful of people were hearing the beckoning of God's magnificent kingdom. Centuries passed. The world evolved, and still the humans were overly forgetful. Few were bored, but fewer were truly happy. Something needed to happen. An adjustment needed to be made. Since the universe had already been created and humans already born, she couldn't put the trillions of pieces of herself back together. So another idea sprang forth from her limitless mind. Beaming with excitement at the simplicity of her new thought, God decided to send to the world once every 100 years a piece of herself with a good, strong memory to remind everybody of who and what they really were. Not being particularly attached to being a woman, she thought, I'll come as a man. And this she did. Once she was born as a prince in India, and she called herself Buddha. And once she was born as a baby in Egypt. She called herself Moses, and she had herself floated down the Nile. And later, she was born in a manger. He was born humbly, offering a hint to those enticed by the world's riches and abundance that God's kingdom is beyond the world and better than riches. Those who remembered sought out the newborn. Those who forgot stayed home. The child grew up quickly, and when he could speak, he did his best to remind people that they were made of a boundless imagination, a complete intelligence, that they were God. Because this young one had the memory of God, he knew how to use his imagination to create in an instant. Anything he thought, if he wanted to feed his friends, he would think fish. And then more fish appeared than they could possibly eat. Those who were forgetful, which was almost everyone, were shocked by these actions. Yet he patiently and lovingly showed them how they could create anything. What I can do, you can do, and more, he said. Most people did not believe this and claimed the young man to be a magician, a trickster. Seek the kingdom of God inside you, then everything else will be added, he said. Surely they would understand, God thought to herself. Surely they should know who they are, for they are me and I am them. But sadly, the most forgetful ones, those fighting to own the world, found the young man threatening, and they arrested him and tied his body to a stake. Because he had the compassion of God, he simply whispered to himself, "Forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." He reminded himself not to be disheartened, but to leave the world in love. Now, back in the realm of the absolute, he entered the gates of eternity completely unharmed, just in time for a massive meeting in his honor. He was tired but uplifted. God had sent to earth many representatives over the years, and as Jesus walked to his seat, some of his fellow messengers encircled him. There was Krishna, Buddha, and Muhammad, all smiling and joining arms. Then Moses ruffled his hair and gave him a big hug. Smiling happily, Jesus sat down. God had called together all the parts of her that had returned to her boundless imagination, about 30 trillion angels in all, to discuss this little problem on earth. The problem was deeper than anyone suspected. God reminded everyone that she had sent thousands of messengers, not just Jesus. Some fared pretty well, but now even those humans who heard the message and remembered were forgetting again and starting wars with different parts of herself. She opened the floor for discussion, saying only that something radical had to happen, something revolutionary. The discussion went on for a few hundred years. Finally, there was a unanimous decision. It was decided that God would go back to earth, not with just a few representatives, but with an entire army. Not an army of violence, but an army of love. God stood before the crowd, not sure if anyone would even want to go. "I will need volunteers," she said. She expected only a handful, but instead all 30 trillion beings put up their hands and a euphoric roar reverberated throughout the universe. Unfortunately, the world couldn't handle everyone all at once, so an eternal waiting list was started. As all the angels scrambled to get in line, one angel stuck up her hand and said, "God, there's one problem. When we get to Earth, we will be forgetful like everybody else. We will have forgotten about this meeting. How will you remind us? How will you make us remember?" And God said, "Brave little soul, that is a question for which I have a solution. So you must all listen very carefully. At an important moment in your earth life, I will arrange for you to stumble upon a book. It will be called A Little Story About the Biggest Thing That Ever Happened. And the instant you read it, you will remember everything and know it was you whom I sent." Smiling at God, the soul understood. The end. Isn't that so good? So I really believe in my heart of hearts, even before I ever learned any of this knowledge, before I was ever exposed to this philosophy, that everyone is saying the same thing. I remember when I was 5 years old, I went into the kitchen. I was like, "Mom, we need to talk." And she was like, "What?" And I was like, "How do you know that we're Baptist?" She was like, what are you saying, 5-year-old child? And I was like, how do you know that we're Baptist? And she's like, well, we're just Baptists. Like, I was born Baptist, you were born Baptist, that's just who we are, we're Baptist. I was like, but did you choose to be Baptist? Or like, is it like our race? Like, I didn't understand. And I was like, so your best friend is Buddhist, right? And she's like, yeah, which is weird in Tallahassee, Florida, okay? My mom's best friend was Japanese and she was Buddhist. And she was amazing and she was with us all the time. And I was like, so according to this, like according to that sweaty guy that's yelling at me all the time and telling me not to do things, she's gonna die and rot in hell. And like I had a really hard time swallowing this as a 5-year-old. And so I was like, I think I need to go check out other places. Like I think I need to find out if I'm Baptist or not. I think I need to go check out other churches. And so my mom, very trustfully, is that a word? She let me go to the Jewish temple and the Church of Latter-day Saints, and she let me go to, there was no Muslim churches there. Those are called temples. But I mean, basically, like the variety that we had in Tallahassee, Florida, like I went to all of them at 5, okay? And so I was sort of on this quest from an early age. But what I kept hearing is that everyone was saying the same thing, right? At the end of the day, at the root of the root of the root of the root, we're all saying the same thing. And this is what I love so much about the Vedas, is that the fundamental concept that the entire thing is built on top of is that there is only one thing and we are all it. And that one thing is consciousness, right? There is only one thing and we are all it, and that one thing is consciousness. If we want to look at this from a scientific point of view, really, because everyone's saying the same thing, because science is its own form of religion, right? It's a thought system, it's a lens through which we interpret nature, which is what I would call religion, it's what I would call science, any lens through which we see nature. And P.S., the Vedas are not a religion. It's a thought system. It's a human interpretation of natural law. So the Vedas are an ancient body of knowledge, which is a human interpretation of natural law. So it's not a doctrine. It's not a dogma. It's not a set of rules. It's not telling you how you should or shouldn't do anything. The Vedas are an ancient body of knowledge that is a human attempt to understand the laws of nature so that we can use those laws to help us get to where we want to go instead of fighting against them and being bashed against the rocks, right? And you know this, and you've probably already started to experience this viscerally, that as you're meditating, as you're getting into that, there's only one thing and we're all it, you're starting to notice that life gets a little bit more flowy, a little bit more elegant, a little more serendipitous. And that will happen as a byproduct of you tapping into the unmanifest. It'll happen as a byproduct of you tapping into that collective consciousness that we all have the great good fortune of swimming in every day, twice a day. But now we're gonna start to up-level our framework and our understanding of that so that we can start to play with these things consciously in our waking state. So if we look at this idea that there's only one thing and we're all it, and that one thing is consciousness, if we look at that from a more scientific point of view, there's only one thing and we're all it, and that one thing is energy. Right after I became a teacher, scientists discovered something called the Higgs boson particle, also known as the God particle. Funny, right? Higgs boson particle, AKA the God particle. Accident? Nope. So what is the Higgs boson particle? Well, it's the smallest thing that we can detect so far, and it's actually just a wave. Now, I think this is hilarious because you guys have all heard me use this wave on the ocean analogy, but get ready because we're going to use it a lot today. So the Vedic viewpoint of looking at this idea that there's only one thing and we're all it is that we are all different waves on this giant ocean of consciousness, right? So I'm the wave that looks like Emily and you're the wave that looks like Eric, but at the end of the day, we're all just shaped ocean, right? We're curved consciousness. We are God pretending to be human. We are the ocean pretending to be the wave. We are totality pretending to be individuality. But the trick is that God is so good at forgetting that she's God, that when we come into the manifest, that when we go into this wave, that when we're born into these bodies, we become so forgetful and we become so identified with this individuality, with this wave, that a lot of us forgets that we're actually the ocean. The wave forgets that it's the ocean, the individuality forgets that it's totality, the human forgets that it's actually a piece of God. And P.S., I know the G word scares some people, so let's just get really clear on a working definition of it to start. I would almost use God and nature as synonyms. They're not quite synonyms, but if that's helpful for you. I would also define God as the collective consciousness of all that is. The collective consciousness of all that is. So me and you 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 and these creaky floorboards and the raindrops outside and Muggsy at home waiting for me to snuggle him and my hair follicles and my nails and every car and every planet and every solar system and every galaxy. It's the collective consciousness of all that is. That would be my working definition of God. So the analogy that we use is that we're all just different waves on this giant ocean of consciousness. But 4.5 years ago, scientists discovered the Higgs boson particle, also known as the God particle. Now, it took them many, many years and a few $1 billion, and they were basically ramming particles into each other at very fast speeds, and then like breaking them apart, and then seeing what they could detect. Like how small were the things that they could detect. So we're talking like smaller than an atom, smaller than a molecule, smaller than a quark, smaller than a leptoquark, and that's the Higgs boson particle. And guess what it is? It's a wave. It's not even a particle at all, it is a wave. And I find this hilarious that it took us so many thousands of years and so many billions of dollars to come back to what these Indian dudes have been saying for thousands of years, which is that there's only one thing and we're all it. So basically, I'm a giant collection of Higgs boson particles shaped like Emily. And you're a giant collection of Higgs boson particles shaped like Lindsay, right? But at the end of the day, when we really de-excite ourselves, we go back to this reality of that there's only one thing and we're all it. So as people start their spiritual journey and their meditation journey, actually, it doesn't even have to be spiritual or meditation. Sometimes if people, they can find it through like music or drugs or sex. Like there's lots of ways to find unity. There's lots of different ways to find totality. And what you generally find is that the people, whatever path people find first, they start to think that that's the way, right? Like, oh, that's why people fight over religion, because it's like once you see the face of God, you're willing to fight over that. And you're like, but no, that's real. That is my truth. So how could yours also be true? But you guys might have also heard my analogy that I like to think of God like a disco ball. And so if you think of God as this beautiful disco ball, and light is reflecting off of it, and I see green, and you see purple, and you see red, and you see a mirror, all of those things are true, and we're all looking at the same thing, right? So this is why I like the Vedas, though, because instead of just being like, God is red, and that's it, that's the beginning and the end, and that is the only truth, it's like, actually, it can all be true. Right? It can all be true simultaneously. Most of us are going through our waking state very identified as this wave or as this body, right? Like from the time we're born, well, that's not true. Like for the first 6 weeks of being on the planet, most babies, like the theory goes, is that they're very much still connected to that collective consciousness. They're very much still aware of that totality. And you'll notice that it's very hard for them to focus their eyes. Their eyes are sort of like this all the time, and then it's not until about 6 weeks in that they can actually focus on things. And the Vedic viewpoint on that is very indicative of the fact that they're still more identified with that universal totality than they are this body. But after about 6 weeks, until we have whatever moment or awakening or realization or reconnection that we have, pretty much it's like this is this, right? And if you cut me, then it hurt, like it's like I could hurt you without hurting myself, or I could help you without helping myself. We're walking around in this appearance of separateness. Now notice that I said appearance, not illusion. Okay, so all these waves, they appear to be separate, but it's not an illusion that they're separate. Okay, meaning they actually, on one layer, at the surface of the ocean, those actually are separate things. Those waves are disparate. And at a different layer, there's only one thing and we're all it. So both things are true simultaneously. It's just that up here it appears to be separate, but it's not an illusion. Okay, so when people start their spiritual journey, they start doing yoga, they start meditating, they start taking drugs, they start going to like jam band concerts, right? Or whatever it is that gets you into flow state, that gets you into that reality, you start to think like, oh, well, like God is where it's at. This meditation thing is where it's at. Yoga is where it's at. These drugs are where it's at. Like this is the truth. God is the truth, and everything else is just fake. That's just all a lie. That's just all an illusion. And this is what we would call the cosmic consciousness blues. Okay, this is like a little bit of a pitfall that some of us can fall into on our spiritual journey, where we start to see, it's like we start to wake up to the fact that there is this deeper alternate reality happening all the time, and then we want to, it's like the pendulum wants to swing all the way into the unmanifest. Remember when I make a joke on day 4 of the course, when I say, hey, be careful, because in a couple of years of starting your meditation practice, it might be really tempting to just want to be like, I'm good, I'm just gonna wallow around in my bliss all day, I've got everything I need right here, like why would I ever go outside? And that is also what we would call like the cosmic consciousness blues, because you're just wanting to wallow around in that ocean. It's like wanting to wallow around in the unmanifest and just meditate all day. But that's not the gig, right? That's not the game. That's not being a bow. That's not being a light. That's not being of service. The reality is that the ocean is never not the wave, and the wave is never not the ocean. Both things are happening simultaneously. And to me, the game is, how do we wake up that simultaneity? How do we start to have this left brain individuality and this right brain totality firing all the time? Now, the good news is that the meditation practice is already giving that to you. It is already strengthening your corpus callosum. It is already increasing your neuroplasticity, so that is starting to be just your baseline state of being. So there's a difference between oneness and unity. So sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, oneness and unity, but they're not the same thing. Oneness is God sitting around for eons and eons by herself, bored. Unity is the one becoming two for the joy of becoming one again. And P.S., that one sentence, the one became two for the joy of becoming one again, that is the Vedas according to Emily Fletcher. Like if I had to write a kid's book, that it would just be one sentence. The one became two for the joy of becoming one again. So basically, singularity, the black hole, the unmanifest, the oneness, right? God sitting around being bored, became two. She divided herself. She broke off into billions of pieces. She came into the manifest for the joy of becoming one again, for the joy of reuniting, for the joy of falling in love, for the joy of seeing a play, for the joy of learning to meditate, right? Like all of these acts where we come home to ourselves, this is all just us reminding ourselves that we're God. So when we fall in love with someone, and this is P.S. sort of the bridge between, a lot of this stuff this morning might not seem super relevant. You're like, yeah, like waves and oceans and Higgs boson particles, but like, how do I deal with my mom issues? But I promise that like there is a point and there is a bridge, and we have to kind of get in the trenches a little bit, because what I'm doing right now is identifying like what is self, which is consciousness actually. Okay, so what is self? It's consciousness. So right now we have to define what consciousness is. What's your relationship to it? What is your relationship between your wave and your ocean? And as we start to clarify that, that's going to start to permeate all of our external relationships. But anytime you fall in love, right, what we're actually falling in love with is ourselves. We're falling in love with unity masquerading as separateness. So think about like a really great first date. Like, oh my gosh, you're wearing a leather jacket, I wear my leather jacket. Oh my God, you love Italian food, I love Italian food. Wait a minute, you love the Matrix, I love the Matrix, right? We're like basically just falling in love with ourselves. It's like ocean reminding itself that it's ocean, and it's just seeing its sameness through this illusion of separateness, right? Or this appearance of separateness, excuse me. So the trick is, if it was just like you're not going to date your twin sister, right, or your twin brother, because it's like too much the same. I mean, nature's actually encoded things in our genes to make that not nice. You know, if you like have sex with people who are related to you, it's like not a good plan, right? Or like, or like, and actually people who have same lineages as you, like you'll find that if you have the exact same like immunity strengths, you won't be sexually attracted to that person. Because if like I'm really good at fighting the measles and you're really good at fighting the measles and we have kids, our kids are gonna die of the mumps, right? So it's like we actually are physically attracted to people who are just enough different from us. But we won't be like having sex with elephants and breeding like humelephants, right? Like that's too different. Like so we need unity masquerading as separateness. Right? So there has to be enough similarity, enough of that, like, oh, right, I'm actually God falling in love with an extension of myself. I am the small s self falling in love with another small s self so that we can remember that we're just capital S self. Right? There's only one thing and we're all it. And this Vedic viewpoint we would call like different waves on the ocean or just small self and big self.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed this very special episode and learning more about these powerful concepts from the Vedas. So to answer the question, why isn't everyone studying the Vedas? Historically, these teachings have only been done teacher to student, and it's been done live in person and very much based on the level of inquiry of the student and the level of consciousness of the teacher. And so moving into mastery is really special because it's one of the first digital offerings, and certainly the only one that exists, that combines this ancient knowledge with such amazing cutting-edge world-class science. So if you would like to join Moving into Mastery, click the link in the show notes under the podcast. And stay tuned because our next bonus episode is going to feature some of my favorite guests inside Moving into Mastery. I'm talking, some world-class experts like Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist from Stanford, Dr. Mark Hyman, and some really brilliant minds that are going to blow your head, heart, and hoo-ha wide open. So I really appreciate you sharing this episode with your friends, with your family, with your beloveds, and I will see you on the next episode.
Bye.